Now I've got my core keyframes set, it's time to use the graph editor to ease them. Let's focus on just the frame. I'll solo that by clicking on the solo switch, and I'll collapse these other two layers. Now if I go into my graph editor and click on the scale property, I'll give myself a little bit more room to work. We're looking at the value graph again. I'm going to switch mine back to the speed graph because it'll work fine for what I'm trying to do. Now because the scale property has two different values, we have two different graph lines again. I'll click and drag a box around these two keyframes, and I'll apply Easy Ease again. The reason I want to apply Easy Ease is because it brings the starting and ending points down to a resting position, which is how I typically want things to animate, starting and ending at a resting position. So it's just a good place to start. This time, instead of clicking on this button, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is F9 on the keyboard. Now, for PC users, it's as simple as pressing F9. For Mac users, you most likely are going to have to hold down the function key, which is right next to the home key, and then press F9 on the keyboard. And that's because the way that the operating system is set up, those keys also function as volume controls and playback controls for music programs. You can change this around by going into your system preferences and go to the keyboard section, but then you'll have to hold down the function key to do things like changing volume. So it's up to you how you want it laid out. I typically leave it the way it is and just hold down the function key and press F9. Alright, now that we have eased keyframes, let's play that back and see what it looks like. So it's a little bit better, but let's exaggerate this motion a little bit more. I want it to take longer to open up and much longer to gradually get to its resting point. So I'm going to select my first keyframe, grab this influence handle, and drag it out. Now one other thing that I should mention is that my handle is being snapped to the current position of the keyframe. That's because I have this magnet icon turned on, which is snapping. This will allow my handles to snap to each other and to the base. If I turn that off, it'd be much harder to keep that value at exactly 0. So typically I work with it on. But if you're having trouble getting it to be at exact 0, that's probably why. Okay, so I'm going to reposition this handle so it has a little bit more influence on the motion, and then I'm going to drag this one all the way to the left to 100% influence. Let's see what that looks like. That's pretty cool. I'd say let's leave that for now and animate the glass on and see how they work together. So I will unsolo this layer, collapse it, and then come out of my graph editor, move forward in time until the window is at least the width of one of the glass panes, and I want to move my two glass pane layers to that point in time so that they don't start animating on until the window frame is covering up the entire width of those two layers. So I'll click on the first layer, shift click on the second layer, and then click and drag them until they go to that point in time. Now the first layer animates on, and then the second two come on after it. Now I'm pretty sure I want the curves of both of these layers to be the same, and you can actually edit multiple layer speed graphs at the same time. So if I click on these two layers and press S to bring up my scale, I can open up the graph editor, click on the first layer scale, Command or Control click on the scale of the second layer, and now both layer scale properties are being represented inside of the graph editor. I'll draw a box around all the keyframes and ease the keyframes again by pressing F9 on the keyboard, and then I'll do the same type of speed curve as I had on the frame. I'll select the first two keyframes, drag out the influence a little bit, and then I'll grab the last two keyframes and drag that influence all the way out to 100. Then I'll preview that animation, and I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. Now I'll just stagger these layers a little bit so they don't animate on at the exact same time. Then I'll select both layers and move them back in time just slightly so the whole thing happens a little bit quicker. And that's basically it for the upper window. Now if I go back out into my house build comp and I preview this animation, you can see that because I have multiple copies of the same pre-comp inside of this comp, the animation that we just applied to the single window is being duplicated across all the copies. This is why pre-comping is so handy. Now let's say I don't want all these windows to animate on at the same time. What if I wanted to start with the first one and then move outwards in both directions? Well then, with all of my layers selected, I will shift click on the middle one to deselect it, then I'll hold Option or Alt on a PC and press Page Down. That moved all of my selected layers forward one frame. Then I will shift click on the next two windows, so I just have the outer window selected, hold down Option and press Page Down again. So now these layers are offset in time in a way that will cascade the animation. If I preview this, it's a little hard to see because I only offset them one frame at a time. So if I offset them again by say 3 frames, 1, 2, 3, and then I shift click on these two windows and add 3 more frames, 1, 2, 3, It's more dramatic, and you can see now that the first layer to animate on is the center, followed by the ones on either side, and then finally the ones on the very outside. Let's say I wanted to animate it from the left to the right. Well, I'll reset these layers back to the first frame by dragging my playhead to the first frame, and then pressing the left bracket on the keyboard. That will move all of your selected layers in points to the playhead. So this time, with all 5 layers selected, I'll shift click on the first one, move the rest of them 4 frames forward, 1, 2, 3, 4, move my playhead forward so I can see what's going on, shift click on the next layer, 4 frames forward, shift click, 1, 2, 3, 4, shift click, 1, 2, 3, 4, play that back, and now they're animating from left to right. So for this project, it's completely up to you how you want to animate your house on. But there's pretty much an unlimited amount of ways that you could do this. Between customizing the way that your layers come on, and then the timing of the layers in your main comp, you can make something completely different looking than what I have here very easily. So it's up to you to be as creative as you'd like.